I am Erik Nordenhaug, a philosophy professor at Georgia Southern University. I would like to introduce a recently published historical novel called The Lighthouse by Dr. Karin Ciholas, who is virtually here with me today.
Well, I am Karin Ciholas, and this is the book we're talking about today, The Lighthouse. And my life story is that I grew up in Switzerland and learned Latin and Greek at a very young age. And so I fell in love with the ancient world when I was 12 years old. And I think I've been living there a lot ever since.
So, what is your novel about?
Well, The Lighthouse is about a dedicated Jewish physician who wants to heal and save lives. But he runs into opposition, violence, and racism. Anti-Semitism rears its very ugly head. Simon lived 2,000 years ago in Alexandria, Egypt. He's struggling with so many battles that he has to fight. And some of the same victories that we want today, he wanted in those days. And one of the things that Simon, my main character, reminds us of, peace is never permanent.
Yes, the point that peace is never permanent certainly appears true today. Is Simon then a lost voice from the past?
Well, he's not totally lost. He is a historical character. He actually lived. I didn't make him up completely. We know a little bit about him. He was born in Cyrene. He studied in Alexandria. He had two sons who are mentioned in the Gospel of Mark. And he's the best known for having been in Jerusalem at the time of the crucifixion. And a Roman soldier forced him to carry the crossbeam. So we do know him historically for that fact. But during his life, his long life, by the way, he is a witness to many events that changed the world. And in all those events, he's a witness, but he cannot stop what is happening, nor can he change it. And that was true at the crucifixion. He was completely baffled by it.
What about readers who are interested in religion?
Well, of course, religion plays a huge role. There's all these different religions there. There's worship of Isis, there's the Roman gods, the Greek gods, and then there's Judaism. I'm focused on Judaism because my main character is a Jew. The problem of religious differences seem to foster unhappiness and violence. And there's no exception to that, it seems to me, age after age. And in the case of Alexandria, the first pogrom took place in Alexandria in 38 CE, and thousands of Jews were massacred, and the Roman authorities did nothing. And when my first part of the trilogy, this is the first book in the trilogy, and Christianity is just beginning, but we know that Christianity is coming, and Christianity will tear families apart. And we know that religious differences will continue to tear countries apart.
What kind of dangers and battles does he face?
Well, the battles against vicious criminals, I'm afraid. We talked about anti-Semitism. He had to struggle against that all his life, and it endangered him and his family. And perhaps the struggle he cares about most is finding ways to heal, is in medicine. he's constantly in that battle for learning better techniques in medicine.
What about his battle against slavery?
Oh, that's very personal. His sister was abducted and sold into slavery. And this was the big blow that sent him to Alexandria to look for her in the slave markets. And this became his personal quest.
How did Simon feel about Rome?
Rome. Rome is, he hates Rome because they're so dominant and so powerful, and yet he admires Rome. Rome is very organized in a way that no other culture beforehand had been, and he admires that. One thing as a doctor that he admires is their obsession with cleanliness, with hygiene. Rome brought baths to every city they went to. They brought aqueducts and fresh water. They made sewers. This act alone healed or kept sickness away from huge populations.
As you studied the history of that time period, was there anything that surprised you?
Well, one of the things that surprised me a lot was in all this organized Roman government, there are many Jews who played a very important role. For instance, there is Herod Agrippa. Herod Agrippa is the grandson of Herod the Great. And he, interestingly enough, he grew up in Rome as a child in the house of Tiberius. And Tiberius treated him as his own son. And when Tiberius wanted some help with the Jews, he called on Herod Agrippa. And later on, he even asked Herod Agrippa to tutor Caligula. Now, we may blame Herod Agrippa a bit for Caligula, but maybe it was too late to give Caligula proper lessons. But in any event, another thing that fascinates me is that in Alexandria, Philo, the great Jewish philosopher, had a brother, and his brother, being Jewish, had a very high position in the city. He was called an alabar, and he controlled the finances of the city. But not only that, he was a financial advisor to the imperial family in Rome. And Josephus, a Jewish historian, tells us that he was probably the richest man in the empire. He's a Jew. His son, also a Jew, of course, is amazing in that he rose to power in Alexandria and became prefect of Egypt. Now, prefect of Egypt is just one level below the emperor with power, because Egypt was so powerful. And that, to me, all of that is very interesting, and I had no idea when I started out.
Since I teach philosophy, and Philo of Alexandria is known as the great Jewish philosopher of his time, tell me more about Philo's role in the novel.
Well, yes, he is a philosopher foremost. You will be glad to know that. We have all of his books. They take up a whole shelf in our house. He wrote in Greek. All of Alexandria is speaking Greek at the time. He is what I would call a diplomat and a historian. And he actually led a whole delegation to Rome to fight for religious freedom for the Jews.
In your novel, you show Alexandria was like the Athens of Egypt. Philo wrote in Greek during that time. Most of Alexandria speaks Greek. the Hellenistic culture that gave us the foundations for science and technology, flourished in Alexandria.
It sure did. To me, it's a Greek city. Everybody now, other languages are spoken there, but the language of commerce is Greek. The language of education is Greek in Alexandria. And Alexandria became the intellectual hub of the empire. And it is the site of the most famous library of antiquity called the Museum. Now we get our word museum from that, and they dedicated the Museum to the muses. So that's one reason for this library, but it was so much more than a library. It was a university complex where they sponsored the progress and advancement of learning.
Does Simon have a romantic side?
Well, as I already said, I fell in love with Alexandria. And yes, that's a good place to talk about love. Simon falls in love with a Roman girl. And the question is, can a couple with such diverse cultural backgrounds and work coming from different worlds, can they make a lasting relationship? The course of true love never did run smooth.
Well, you should know you married a Frenchman.
Well, you should know too. You married a Greek girl.
Agreed.
Touché.
Perhaps we should let that topic drop before we get into trouble here. How is your book different from all the others on the same shelf in the library?
Well, novels can be both historical and emotionally engaging. And I try very hard to be totally historically accurate as we can be. But my main focus is on character. Characters with flesh and blood. I want the reader to feel with the characters. I want the readers to go up to Simon and want to shake him when he's about to do something dangerous and try to talk some sense into him. And even old Tiberius, I show him as an old emperor, but we see his anguish. We see how he suffers. In other words, I want to make them real to the reader. So I think I emphasize that emotional side of the character, wanting the reader to live with them and go through their struggles with them.
One of the things I felt when I read it, and it's sort of in the background of all the chapters and all the scenes, is just the ever-present. It's not enough just to call it anti-Semitism. It's just the ever-present feeling of being in this minority group that is continually oppressed, right, for both small and large things. And it becomes this kind of an ordinary part of Simon's life, right? It's felt as ordinary is what was interesting to me as you read the whole novel. It's not felt as, oh, it's this evil anti-Semitism. No, it's just how it is. And it's just always ever present. I think your novel does a very good job of conveying that particular feeling as what it's like. I'm thinking of Martha Nussbaum, a famous philosopher a contemporary who suggests that if we don't develop our powers of imagination to be empathetic with minority groups, with groups that are oppressed, and her view is it's probably more through novels than through philosophy that empathetic imagination is developed in human beings simply by reading novels. Martha Nussbaum makes that case, and I think it's a powerful case that it's hard for someone who hasn't, suffered that kind of oppression or racism to feel it except in certain imagined narratives as you construct. I consider that one of the important feelings that we get from this novel.
Thank you. I really agree with Nussbaum and your assessment that this is one way we educate all of us away from these prejudices that maybe we grew up with without even realizing. And I think the scene at the beginning of the novel where Valerius, the Roman who knows he's powerful, is with the Jew Simon who knows he's not powerful, and yet they're best friends, you sense that there is that distance that is so difficult to overcome. And at one point, Simon says, you don't even know what it's like. And I think Valerius doesn't quite believe him. So that's exactly this element of empathy that you're talking about.
What is the main message of the book that you'd like to leave with the reader?
Oh, the fight for justice is never done. It's never over. And honor and integrity win sometimes, but not always, or certainly not always. And despite the many setbacks that Simon has, Simon brings healing to many. We all need healing.
Indeed.